I tried everything to learn Spanish, and all of it was a waste of time except for 5 things. The 5 keys that took me from zero to fluent in Spanish. And I'm gonna share all 5 of them with you. I've wanted to learn Spanish for as long as I can remember, ever since moving to the US from Haiti and growing up in Black and Latino communities. And I wanted to talk to people and make friends, but I couldn't a lot of times because it felt like there was this invisible wall keeping me out. Well, today I can finally say that I am a fluent Spanish speaker, and it feels so good to say that. I've gone from knowing 0 Spanish to just a few months ago taking the Spanish C2 exam, which is probably the hardest Spanish certification exam in the entire world. And I've done interviews on the streets of Mexico and Argentina with natives in full Spanish. So it almost feels as if I have a home in almost every continent, and it's a really cool feeling and a dream come true. But it wasn't easy, and I wish I'd had someone when I first started learning Spanish to guide me and help me avoid wasting efforts and getting frustrated like I did. I tried a lot, failed, and learned a ton about what works and what doesn't work to become fluent. So I'll share it all with you to help you avoid making the same mistakes that I did. Our story starts out during my childhood. Near the house and at school, my childhood was filled with sounds of English, Creole, and occasionally in the distance, Spanish. I already spoke Creole at the time as my native language from Haiti, so I became deeply fascinated and enamored by the other 2 foreign sounds I was hearing around me at the time. I had to learn them. And I learned English naturally pretty fast, since that's what I was surrounded by most and what I was being taught in ESL. Okay, so I had Creole, my native language, and English, my second language. 2 down, 0 Spanish. So my English kept getting better, but I never found a moment to start learning Spanish. So why am I telling you about this part? Because I did pick up one of the first and most valuable keys to learning Spanish. I built a deep interest, curiosity, and fascination in the Spanish language. To my 12-year-old eyes and ears, if you spoke Spanish at the time, you were the closest thing to a real-life superhero. Learning Spanish can be a long and challenging process, and many people give up because their desire to learn doesn't outweigh the struggles, because you will struggle. So the first thing to do is to really plant into your why. Why do you want to learn Spanish? The why can be simple, but it should be powerful enough to move and excite you. Maybe it's being starstruck by the beautiful display of colors, food, dance, and life during Dia de los Muertos in Mexico. Or maybe it's a Dominican girl next door who giggled at you when she saw you trying to dance bachata, and now you want to learn all about her culture and throw yourself into the language and food to impress her. It can be cheesy and simple like that, but it should be powerful enough to make you obsess over the idea of being able to speak Spanish. My why was pretty basic. I wanted to make friends with the kids around me, get invited to the asado, get the courage to finally talk to the girl down the street, and not feel left out when trying to make friends. So it was super simple, but this why was seated long enough that it carried a powerful emotional weight to motivate me. Stage 2, school. I got into middle school, and the first thing we did was pick our classes for the year. I picked up the list of available classes, and my eyes, like a hawk, spotted the needle in the haystack of courses. It read Spanish for Beginner. My heart instantly jumped with excitement at the idea of learning how to speak Spanish. And then classes started. And to my surprise, I was not a fluent Spanish speaker after the first week. We did likely what most grade school language classes do. Sing the alphabet song, learn to say, Hola, me llamo Jerry, encantado de conocerte. All of that is standard and helpful, but I felt like I was moving at snail speed. I felt like I would take 2 steps forward during the 30-minute class and then 1.9 steps back the rest of the day. So my Spanish dragged. But there is one thing that stood out from middle school that I would recommend. I stumbled on a site called studyspanish.com, and this became the holy grail of learning basics for me. The lessons made sense, they broke down the grammar rules, they gave quizzes to practice what you learned. So I pretty much tossed the books they gave us in school aside, and I focused on study Spanish to learn the basics of Spanish grammar. By the time I left middle school, I wasn't able to say more than a few sentences at a time, but I did snag key number 2 to learning Spanish. I learned the basic Spanish grammar and language structures, just enough to be able to start making simple sentences. You can and do learn Spanish mostly by interacting and consuming content in Spanish, but it's hard for your brain to know where to put all that information sometimes if you don't have the basics of grammar down. You don't have to spend too long here. Just pick one grammar rule at a time and try to listen to it as you go about your day and consume Spanish content, and then stack that until you learn most of the grammar patterns. High school was much of the same. A continuation of the standard school language education. But 2 special things happened during high school. In my senior year, we had our first class that was conducted all in Spanish, where we had to speak and listen to Spanish for 30 minutes plus a day. I was taking AP Spanish at the time, which is meant to be fully taught and run in the language. And boy, this was a struggle. I owe a lot to the folks that run the AP Spanish program, but my brain would hurt for 30 minutes every day. But this was the first time I experienced what being surrounded by Spanish actually felt like, where you couldn't just memorize 3 phrases and then go back to English. You had to keep drowning in the language whether you could swim or not. You were actually immersed. The second special thing that happened was that I started watching shows in Spanish. I brought my immersion home. I remember watching a show called Decisiones Extremas that was so overly dramatic that you could watch and understand the full episode even if you didn't understand a single word that they said. The Spanish wrecked me and I couldn't understand much, but the fact that I could get the episodes just by watching the show made it interesting enough for me to sit through episode after episode without getting bored. And this was awesome to be able to continue my immersion at home and listen to what real Spanish sounded like versus classroom Spanish. If I had to do this today, I'd probably recommend easier content than the struggle I put myself through with Decisiones. Now you have channels like the Easy Spanish YouTube channel that give you the real life Spanish but also handhold you through it more. Those videos should be a lot easier to watch and pick up from and actually understand some of the Spanish. And then came university. Senior year of high school and university were very similar. I would do my hour of Spanish class and then try to watch a show later in the day to refresh my Spanish. During this school period, I was doing a lot of listening and some writing, so my listening skills went through the roof and my writing got okay. But I still never spoke Spanish for more than 5 to 10 phrases at a time in class. At the time, I didn't know about language exchange partners that you can find from places like Tandem, but this would have been perfect to practice with someone that I don't know, over the phone so I'm not embarrassed, and in a language learning context so they're expecting me not to have the language down. But this was another mistake I made at the time. College was when I found the second grammar tool I became a big fan of. It was called the Manual de Gramática by Zulma Eguina. The explanations were super clear and simple, and this is probably one of my favorite tools to this day. For grammar, out of all the stuff that's out there, I really think you can just keep it simple and use StudySpanish.com, Manual de Gramática, and one more tool that I'll share with you later in the video. Besides this grammar book, another thing I started doing in university was listening to music in Spanish. I saved all the really slow songs like Agua by Jarabe de Palo and El Rey by Jose Alfredo Jimenez. And I made a playlist that I would listen to in my free time. That's how I snagged key number 3. Consume lots of content in Spanish around your interests. If you like cooking, watch cooking shows in Spanish from Equatorial Guinea. Go see Encanto in Spanish if you like Disney films. Whatever it is, make it easy to have Spanish fit into your life around your interests. Playlists, shows, the people you follow, all of it. Stage 3, study abroad. The 4th key I picked up right before I left university. In one of my last semesters of college, I went abroad to Seville, Spain for a semester. We had 5 months to be in the country, so I set out on a quest. I took a personal language pledge and said I wasn't going to speak, write, listen, read, or even think in English as long as I was in Sevilla. This was really hard at first. My brain had no way to escape Spanish, and I loved it. I struggled at first. I sort of stopped talking to most people because I didn't have enough Spanish for back and forth conversations. And I felt like my brain was empty almost all the time because I wouldn't let myself think in English and I didn't yet have the fluency to have a lot of coherent thoughts in Spanish. Soon I started talking to myself in Spanish, both in my mind and sometimes literally talking to myself before I had enough confidence to speak to other people.
Eso es una grabación de mi nivel de español. Ahora había estado en España por una semana.
Bit by bit, I started to understand more and more Spanish. Then I started to write, and then I started to speak. Safe to say, Google Translate and Spanish Dict became the 2 most used apps on my phone at the time. While abroad, some other things I did to improve my Spanish were I switched all my consumption to Spanish, changed all my devices to Spanish, phone, laptop, Google accounts, you name it. I built playlists of songs all in Spanish, and I started to watch every show in Spanish on Netflix, like Élite, La Casa de Papel, La Catedral del Mar, Velvet, everything that was out there. I then started journaling before bed in Spanish, and the writing was a good habit to get into. As for vocab and grammar, I switched to watching Spanish with Vicente on YouTube for advanced Spanish concepts, and Lethal Crisis also on YouTube for fast, natural Spanish outside the teaching context, more from things like short films. Lastly, I discovered what I would say is the 3rd grammar resource I'd actually recommend. EspanolAvanzado.com was the first site I discovered that had niche language concepts explained beautifully in a way that English speakers could really relate to and understand. By the time I left Spain, I was confident enough to listen, read, write, and speak in Spanish. I still made tons of mistakes all the time, but I grew comfortable that I could understand Spanish, have conversations, and live all in Spanish, even with those mistakes. Study abroad was a big leap forward for my Spanish. So key number 4 of the 5 essential keys for me was Spanish immersion. In my case, I spent 5 months in Spain, but I don't think immersion means you have to go to another country. It means a dedicated period of time where you try to live and think in Spanish as much as possible. Try to eliminate English or your language completely from your life for a time. I've done this back in the US through a mix of changing the content I listen to, read, and watch, finding language partners to call and have conversations with, and using virtual reality language experiences. I really believe after learning the basics of Spanish, going through a period of intensive Spanish where you try to live and think as much in Spanish as humanly possible really accelerates your Spanish learning. Stage 4, solo studying back in the US. The last key number 5 is what I'm living through now.
Back then I used to drive off Mason. Those cops not used to the faces. We got, they would run my plates and we stopped, but I just left work while I restopped.
Ever since I've returned from Spain, I make efforts to keep Spanish in my life daily, and I try to advance by learning Spanish from different regions. Sometimes I learn vocab, slang, and patterns unique to Mexican Spanish. Other times I'll do Argentinian Spanish, and I have a lot more to go. The resources I use most today are Español Avanzado to learn complex and hard to find grammar rules. I continue to watch shows and listen to music almost exclusively in Spanish. I find language exchange partners, mostly through Tandem, to meet other language students that I can practice texting and calling in Spanish with. And lastly, I think the language exams, they're called the daily exams for Spanish, are actually really useful at this stage to help you organize your studying, give you something to strive to, and improve your Spanish at that level. Otherwise, it might feel like you're not fully done with Spanish, but you're not sure what to learn or how to advance. So for the Spanish C2 exam, I did a bunch of writing, a ton of 500-word short essays on space exploration, economic development in Latin America, deforestation, and other topics that you probably don't get to practice in your everyday life talking to other people. In all, I'd summarize the last key number 5 as polish, go deep on your specific interests in Spanish, and consider taking a C-level Spanish daily exam. And don't forget to use your Spanish to form relationships with other people, because that's likely why you started learning in the first place.
Tu experiencia de viaje más memorable en Argentina hasta el momento.
Pero mucho de juntarnos con amigos. Y nada, esos son recuerdos muy lindos.
That's my Spanish learning experience, and it's just one way to do it. Check out this video where we look at how AI like ChatGPT can help you supercharge and practice your Spanish even if you don't have people around you. See you there, and hasta la próxima. Shoot, I think these are the wrong keys.